Welcome to This Explainer. Have you ever stopped to wonder why you can't just stroll into a grocery store and buy a fully functioning jetpack? Or why a pharmaceutical company can't just decide overnight to charge $1 million for basic life-saving medicine? It's something that literally shapes almost every single interaction we have in our modern world, yet we kind of just take it for granted. Today, we're unpacking the foundational logic behind government regulation, why it's there, and how it completely shapes the businesses that make up our economy. So, this brings us to a massive $1 million question. Are government regulations actually good for businesses, or do they just hold them back? It's a debate you see dominating headlines all the time, right? We're going to figure out if these government rules are the secret sauce to a healthy functioning market, or if they're just a massive roadblock that smothers entrepreneurs before they can even get their ideas off the ground. But hey, before we dive into the pros and cons, we really need to define what government regulation actually is in practice. And what's kind of fascinating here is just how broad this definition is. We're talking about rules created and enforced by the government that businesses and individuals are literally required to follow. It's not just a polite suggestion, it's a strict mandate that dictates the exact boundaries of how our economy operates every single day. Now, the basic objective here is absolutely crucial to understand. Businesses should make profits, right? That's the engine of our economy. But they have to do so without creating unacceptable harm. Whether a regulation is dictating food safety standards for our groceries, rigorous pharmaceutical testing for our medicines, or even just how a bank handles our hard-earned money, the core goal is always the same, allowing for profit but firmly establishing a safety net for society. Let's break this down a bit further. We can actually categorize the main reasons governments step in into 4 specific pillars of societal protection. We've got consumer protection, employee protection, environmental protection, and fair competition. By organizing the rules into these 4 buckets, we can really start to see the deliberate architecture behind what honestly might otherwise just look like a giant mountain of red tape. So let's zoom in on those first 2 pillars for a second. Consumer protection? Well, that means we get safe medicines, transparent food ingredients, and, accurate expiry dates on our milk. Then there's employee protection, which gives us established rules for fair wages, working hours, and basic workplace safety. Think about it for a second. Without these baseline standards, you might unknowingly buy completely unsafe products, or workers could easily be exploited by employers who are just looking to maximize their margins at any human cost. Moving to the bottom 2 pillars. Environmental protection and fair competition. In the relentless pursuit of profit, businesses can sometimes create massive pollution, so these rules step in to force companies to actually account for their environmental damage and the broader social cost of what they're doing. At the same time, fair competition ensures the marketplace actually rewards genuine innovation. It actively steps in to prevent monopolies, fraud, and cheating. Basically, it stops a single massive corporation from literally owning every single grocery store in your state. And this brings us to a reality that so often gets lost in the noise. Well-designed regulation can actually help businesses. Now, I know that sounds completely counterintuitive. Normally, we think of strict constraints as a fundamentally negative force, right? A total buzzkill for the corporate world. But because these rules establish a reliable baseline of quality and safety, they actually build deep consumer trust. When customers know products have to meet specific standards, they trust the market more. And hey, that drives sales. To really wrap our heads around how this helps businesses, let's look at a quick comparison to explain the whole level playing field concept. Imagine we have 2 companies competing in the exact same industry. On one side, Company A is dutifully paying for safety compliance and following all the environmental standards. On the other side, Company B is just ignoring those standards entirely, cutting corners to illegally reduce their costs and offer a much cheaper product.
Here's where regulation shines. It establishes a baseline. It means businesses are forced to compete on actual efficiency and real innovation, not just on how well they can break the rules. Without regulation, Company B, the rule breaker, has a massive, totally unfair financial advantage. It puts Company A at a severe competitive disadvantage, just for doing the right thing. But mandated minimum standards force everyone to compete fairly.
Furthermore, governments actually support businesses directly in a ton of ways. Beyond just creating that level playing field and driving customer trust, governments provide loans, they give out grants, they offer targeted tax incentives, and they vigorously defend a company's intellectual property. So regulation isn't always about holding business back. Very often, it's about creating the exact optimal conditions for a healthy market to thrive. Moving on to our next section, the burdens, the antithesis of regulation. All right, let's completely flip the perspective now and look at the very real, very heavy obstacles these rules create. The first massive hurdle, the sheer cost of compliance. And we aren't just talking about filling out a quick PDF online. We're talking about hiring expensive legal teams, specialized consultants, running routine audits, setting up complex reporting systems, buying pricey licenses, the whole shebang, just to prove you're following the rules. For a massive multinational corporation, sure, these costs might be a drop in the bucket. But for a small, scrappy startup, it can be a fatal drain on their limited resources. When you stack on the sheer complexity of all that paperwork, it actively distracts founders from what they should be doing, focusing on their customers and their products. Then you've got innovation limits. Technology moves incredibly fast, right? But government rules are notoriously slow to adapt. Outdated rules can literally restrict new ideas. And finally, the barriers to entry. When there are just too many approvals required, smaller companies struggle to even enter the market, which inadvertently ends up protecting the big legacy corporations from any new competition. Let's look at a micro case study to ground this: electric vehicle technology. To see exactly how this conflict plays out in the real world, let's trace a three-step journey of a brand new electric vehicle. Step 1. A startup invents this amazing, highly efficient new EV technology. It's brilliant. But then, boom, they hit step 2, a massive wall of mandatory government testing, documentation, and compliance. They literally cannot move to step 3, entering the consumer market, until they painstakingly clear that highly bureaucratic wall. This tension right here, this gets to the absolute core of the whole debate. From the perspective of the business, all that mandatory testing is a massive cost and a seriously frustrating delay. It just feels like a heavy burden. But switch over to the consumer's perspective, and those exact same requirements provide absolute protection. They give you the vital confidence that the vehicle actually meets minimum safety standards before you're cruising down the highway at 70 miles an hour. It's one single regulation, but two completely valid perspectives. So, what happens if we tip the scales too far in one direction? Well, too little regulation basically equals fraud, unsafe products, environmental damage, and worker exploitation. If we just strip away too many rules in the name of total business freedom, we open the door wide to absolute disaster. We'd lose the critical safety nets that keep the economy from harming the very society it's supposed to serve. But on the flip side, and this is just as important, too much regulation equals insanely high costs, suffocating bureaucracy, discouraged entrepreneurship, and dramatically slowed innovation. If we impose too many rules in the absolute name of safety and risk avoidance, we essentially drown our brightest entrepreneurs in red tape. We'd stop technological progress right in its tracks. Which brings us to the balancing act, finding the right equilibrium. This is the ultimate negotiation of priorities. The central debate we face today isn't just a simplistic demand for more or less government intervention. It's about finding the exact right equilibrium. How do we balance explosive economic growth and innovation with consumer protection, fair competition, and social responsibility? There's no single easy answer here. But the next time you hear the phrase government regulation, you'll know exactly what's at stake. So ask yourself, how can we intelligently design rules that protect society without unnecessarily smothering the brilliant innovators who are just trying to build the future? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking those big questions.